For BBC One Now, our Sunday morning rendezvous with news and views in Breakfast with Frost.
Hello, good morning and welcome to Breakfast with Frost. While the rumour factory at Westminster continues to turn out ever more bizarre tales of plots to oust the Prime Minister and further defections from the Tory party, personal feuding going on at the top of the Labour Party, the political news in today's papers centres on the leader of the Liberal Democrats. The normally restrained Observer says Paddy's panting for a new liaison. Well, as people around the nation might say, aren't we all? Mr. Ashdown is with us this morning to fill in the how, what and when. On the 5th anniversary of the final battle in the Gulf War, we also have an exclusive interview with former President George Bush, talking candidly about the miscalculations as well as the many things that were right. And he explains his decision not to press on to Baghdad and complete the rout of the Iraqis by that means. We'll be getting the latest news on the Palestinian elections live from our man on the spot, and reviewing the papers, Professor Tony King and Barbara Amiel are with us, a dream couple, a dream team, if ever I heard one. But first this morning, we're delighted to welcome back to the news desk, Jenny Bond. Good morning, Jenny.
Good morning, David. Good morning. The PLO leader Yasser Arafat is on course for a landslide victory in the first election of the Palestinian president. He's won 85% of the votes counted so far. The turnout was good, and the Israeli Prime Minister has described the election as the crowning achievement of the peace accord.
Counting went on all night. The Palestinian election authorities say there was a turnout of more than 60%. The biggest weakness of the election was the fact that it was boycotted by the Palestinian left-wing and Islamic opposition parties. But independent candidates have in some places done better than expected. Palestinians who want to curb Yasser Arafat's authoritarian tendencies will be grateful for that. Mr. Arafat, as expected, has scored a crushing victory over his only opponent for the presidency. Last night, the Israeli Prime Minister phoned him with his congratulations.
The people that went to the ballots did not just elect their representatives, but they have approved the agreement.
Not all Israelis are as delighted. Right-wingers demonstrated in Jerusalem last night to protest about Palestinians voting here. Israel claims Jerusalem undivided as its capital. The Palestinians want the east of the city, which Israel annexed after the 1967 war, as theirs. Later today, international observers were expected to say whether they thought the elections were free and fair. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Police in Birmingham will start questioning a 38-year-old man this morning about the deaths of 4 children and a woman. The bodies of 3 girls were found in a house in Bristol, and the woman and a 2.5-year-old boy died in Birmingham city centre.
The results of the post-mortem carried out on the 35-year-old woman who died near Birmingham's New Street railway station reveal that she died of multiple stab wounds. The young boy, who was found in a car nearby, died of asphyxiation. Birmingham police were called to the station yesterday afternoon after a man and a woman were seen arguing in the car park. The police intervened, but the woman collapsed with stab wounds and was dead on arrival at hospital. A 38-year-old man, who police say was from Bristol, was arrested and taken to hospital, also suffering from stab wounds. He was later released and taken to a police station for questioning. 2 hours later, police in Bristol broke into a house in the Montpellier district after receiving information from the Birmingham police. In an upstairs bedroom, they found the bodies of 3 dead girls. They were sisters aged 9, 11 and 14. They're believed to have had knife wounds, but the results of their post-mortems have not yet been confirmed.
Obviously, it's very early days. The scene has been secured. We're investigating the circumstances surrounding that death, and we'll obviously be seeking to interview family members.
No names have yet been released, and police will continue with their inquiries today. Jane Waugh, BBC News.
The director of the Serious Fraud Office is to step down next year. George Staple says he won't be seeking to renew his contract when it expires, and he insists his decision is not connected to the SFO failing to win a conviction against Kevin and Ian Maxwell. Buckingham Palace says it would welcome any development which might allow the Duchess of York to pay off her debts, which some reports put at £3 million. The Duchess, who has been attending charity fundraising events in the United States, is thought to have arranged a deal with an American television company involving her Budgie the helicopter stories. German police are questioning a young Lebanese refugee about a fire at a hostel in the city of Lübeck, which killed 10 people. The man, who is 21, is charged with their murder. He's also accused of attempting to murder another 38 people. He lived in the hostel with his family. Thousands of knives have been handed in to police during a month-long amnesty which ended at midnight. They'll begin counting the knives later today. 3,000 collection bins were placed in police stations across England and Wales for the amnesty, which was called after the stabbing of the London headmaster, Philip Lawrence. Well, that's it for now. I'll be back just before 9:45 with the headlines. Now, back to David.
Thank you very much indeed, Jenny. Thank you. Well, as you heard in the news there, President Arafat is sweeping to victory in the first ever elections in Palestine, and we're joined now from over there, in fact from Ramallah, by our own correspondent, the one and only Jeremy Bowen. Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning, David.
I suppose setting all of the details into context, looking back, I think back to our interviews with Mr. Rabin just 2 years ago and so on, it's a miracle that this election took place successfully at all, isn't it?
Well, it's really extraordinary how far they've gone. I thought myself as I was looking at Palestinians voting in yesterday, they were voting in towns where just a very short time ago they could be arrested if they even showed a Palestinian flag. So while the election had real limitations, the fact is I think it's still a big step.
And when you say real limitations, I think Mr. Arafat is meeting this morning with President Jimmy Carter and so on. I presume that the observers, these distinguished observers, are going to say maybe there were flaws in the voting, but it's, well, we were saying, a miracle it took place at all. In the circumstances, okay. Is that what they're going to say?
Well, Jimmy Carter was, and the other observers, were particularly concerned about the level of Israeli security in East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is where the Palestinians want their capital. The Israelis say that the whole city will be their capital forever. And Palestinians believe that the Israelis put that much security in to discourage people from voting so that a low voter turnout would enable them to say that Palestinians aren't interested in Jerusalem as their capital. But as for limitations, there are wider problems as well. One is that the opposition, Islamic and left-wing on the Palestinian side, decided to boycott the elections. That means that the fear is that the new Legislative Council that has been elected will be something of a rubber stamp for Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat has well-known authoritarian tendencies, so there are concerns that perhaps the whole thing might be not quite as democratic as it should be.
And in terms of the immediate future, what is going to happen about East Jerusalem? I'm not talking now about the end of the 5-year negotiations, but in a way, as you say, there was a large Israeli presence. Were you surprised they let there be any elections at all in East Jerusalem?
Well, I wasn't surprised because it was clear that to get agreement for the peace process for elections, the Palestinians were going to have to be able to vote in some shape or form in East Jerusalem. Israeli right-wingers, though, are deeply concerned by the fact that Palestinians were allowed to vote there, and deeply concerned, too, by the fact that Jerusalem goes onto the negotiating table, because they say that that means Jerusalem is on the agenda when it shouldn't even be on the agenda at all. And if I could just say one other thing about this business of democracy, as a matter of fact, I was a little skeptical looking at Arafat's tendencies and the limitations, as we were saying, of the new council. But some Palestinians I was talking to this morning were really very happy. They were saying, okay, there are limitations, but the fact is, for the first time, we see little cracks in Arafat's iron grip on the Palestinians. And for us, they said, that's very good.
And what will the final turnout figure be, Jeremy, do you think?
Latest figures I've got are 90% plus for Gaza and 70% plus for the West Bank. Those are very high figures, I think as high as anybody was expecting, and they'll be taken by the Palestinians, I think rightly, as a ringing seal of approval for Arafat's decision to make peace with Israel and for the path that he has decided to take. However, it has to be said that people will only continue to accept it as long as they believe that it will lead to a Palestinian state. Many people now believe that, but if the momentum slows, then they'll start to doubt, and that could be difficult.
And do you feel that it's encouraging that there was relatively little violence during this election, relatively little considering how violent Hamas can be? Do you still see them as a big threat or a slightly lesser threat?
I think Hamas definitely on the defensive at the moment as a political force within the Palestinian community. I think that politically perhaps they've missed the boat, and certainly some of their own people think that, by not taking part in the election. However, it is a big mistake to write Hamas off. They've been written off before, then they've showed the strength that they have by letting off bombs in Israel, for example. The Israelis expect some kind of terrorist attack. They're on the alert for it at the moment, and even though terrorism hasn't derailed the peace process up to now, it still might. A big attack in a very sensitive place, in a mosque or in a synagogue, could still do those things. Even though the peace process has real momentum, it's also rather unstable and could still be delayed or damaged, perhaps irreparably.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Jeremy Bowen there with the latest on the Palestinian elections. Now, for our review of the Sunday papers, the Independent on Sunday has Labour to ballot parents over scrapping grammar schools. On a lighter note, the News of the World has Di's midnight trysts with a hunk in black, which might be explained by this story in the People, Make Me Baroness of Kensington. Could be Black Rod, I suppose, couldn't it? Technically, in fact. That explains it all. Accused, Diana warned, will sue over Tiggy slanders. American tycoon rides to the rescue of Fergie. I think we touched on that in the news. Fergie's deal on her debts. And US tycoons, shame of Gap's child labour sweatshops, Labour fat cats curbs unveiled, all in the Telegraph. So there we are. Now it's our joy to welcome this morning Barbara Amiel. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning.
And Professor Tony King from Essex University. Good morning. Good morning. Barbara, where would you like to start?
Well, I think you've just taken away what I wanted to do, which was dismiss most of the tabloids. I think this week is a perfect example of the sublime and the ridiculous in journalism. And the tabloids, with their various front pages on the royal family, Tiggy Leg Burke suing, Fergie's $3 million debts, Diana's midnight tryst with a man in black or a black man, God knows what, and Make Me Baroness of Kensington. I think I've just about plumbed the depths of the royal story. And it is, there's a boredom level that even I cannot take any more of it. So I'm afraid I haven't earned my entirely generous fee for this program, because I could not go any further within the tabloids after that. What is interesting in the broadsheets is that they are beginning now to examine the Labour Party. We've had a lot of work on the divisions in the Tory party, but nobody's really been looking at the Labour Party and what's going on until Tony Blair started his stakeholding idea. The Independent story, Labour to ballot parents over scrapping grammar schools, is a very good story. It's the beginning of us beginning to see the return of old Labour. And that's followed up in the Sunday Times by a very interesting column by Andrew Neil, who I must say as a columnist makes some of us feel rather shamefaced, pointing out that Wapping was 10 years ago. And don't forget the lessons, because if Labour comes back, we may be looking at a reunionized newspaper business.
All right, well, let's just bring in Tony at that particular point. What have you got there?
Well, I think the business of the Labour Party is going to be fascinating over the next year or so. Barbara's absolutely right. Up till now, Tony Blair has had a pretty easy ride. What you're now going to find is newspapers, and not just conservative newspapers either, really beginning to draw attention to the personal feuds at the top and also making a lot of the vagueness of many of Labour's policies. I've been very struck by the fact that television and radio interviewers are getting tougher and tougher with Labour people, and I think that's bound to go on. And in fact, the Sunday Times had a poll which happened to show a reduction of 6 points in the Labour lead and so on, and Andrew Rawnsley has a thing in the Observer where he points out the true lead. When it's 30, the true lead is 8 or 10. Do you think basically you can divide any lead we read in the opinion polls by 3 to get to the really determined to votes? 3 may be overdoing it a bit, but certainly the Labour lead is much smaller, as we keep seeing in local elections and in the Euro elections last year. I must say I'm enjoying hugely all this business about stakeholding. Here we have also in the Sunday Times how stakeholding shrunk to a slogan. And it does seem to me to be not, quite apart from anything else, a very good slogan. When I first heard him talk, Tony Blair talk on the radio one morning about the stakeholder society, I first had visions of somebody coming out of a butcher shop holding a sirloin, and we'd make a wonderful charades kind of thing. What I didn't know... People saying I'm a vegetarian, yeah. What I didn't know, and this is very foolish of me because I come from Canada originally, there's a Q&A in the Sunday Times, a question and answer column, and one of the questions is why stake, S-T-A-K-E, holder? Because when the first settlers traveled to the American West, they staked their claims on parcels of land by putting stakes. Well, I didn't know that before, did you?
Well, whenever I heard about stakeholding, I thought of sharecropping. I don't know why. And
Shareholding, stakeholding, yes. Yes. Well, as he said last week, it was a unifying theme rather than a new policy. I've got Sunday Mirror here who's got an amazing offer, which I cannot work out. Explore the beauty of Austria from the warmth of a luxury coast. We have put together a special 4-night, 7-day trip with Britain's #1 coach holiday company. Now, what happens on the other 3 nights? I think we should be told.
I want to take up some of the foreign news, which is really being handled rather well, and I draw your attention, you just did a piece on the Palestinian election, and Con Coughlin in the Sunday Telegraph has an excellent piece pointing out that while we are indeed all terribly happy that an election has taken place, those foreign observers, Lord Allenby and dear President Carter, running around criticizing the Israelis for the shape of their ballot boxes or postal ballots, haven't paid very much attention to the intimidation of candidates who weren't able to stand, haven't paid much attention to Arabs running through the streets shouting "Burn Tel Aviv." And his piece is not a one-sided piece, but it's an interesting piece of factual reporting that one really gets best, I think, in the British press. And that's something worth counting.
Absolutely. Tony, your next thought?
Can I come back home?
Yes.
Domestic politics.
You can come back home anytime.
I mean, I was fascinated. Here is Night and Day, the Mail on Sunday Review, the front cover of it. And there's a man with specs and a grey suit, but he turns out not to be a conservative in a grey suit. It says here, how long must Blair wait? This man knows. And I have to confess, I blinked before realizing that this character was David Trimble, the leader of the Ulster Unionists. And I think one of the fun things to watch over the next few months is going to be how, in the case of David Trimble and the Ulster Unionists, we won't know their bottom line, we will scarcely know their top line. The government is going to become more and more reliant on them, and they don't know what they're relying on. There's a lovely bit in the Observer where Trimble is quoted as saying, or rather the two Observer correspondents say, John Major could be forced to sack ministers criticised in next month's Scott report on the arms to Iraq scandal, or face the withdrawal of vital Ulster Unionist support. David Trimble is alleged to have described Sir Nicholas Lyall, the Attorney General, already as dead meat. And I think we're going to hear more and more of the Ulster Unionists over the next few months.
Good prediction.
When the future of British politics is at stake, it is a shame, I think, if it becomes trivialised to a constant obsession and fixation on will Mr Major fall off the high wire this week or next week, at the expense, really, of policy. And policy is what I think is important to study in Labour. and policy study is what I'm hoping the newspapers will give us. But I have to give you one story.
What is your last thought?
On an immensely trivial level. It is a fashion tip, David. The newest thing in fashion, and this is in the Sunday Times style section, is the mouth bar, a piece of silver which keeps your mouth open at a 45-degree angle the entire time, can be purchased for £55 and prevents you from eating and talking, which many listeners and viewers may think is a good thing, but does not, unfortunately, prevent us from writing.
Oh, well, that's interesting, because health also, and you mentioned night and day, in this field of health, there's a thing also in night and day. Gary Barker, mathematician at the Institute of Food Research, has written the definitive paper on the physics of muesli. Interesting subject. I don't think you have that course at Essex, but anyway, he says here,
we're working on it, though. We're developing
it for breakfast.
He says,
is it bad?
quote, a theoretical understanding, this is what it is, a theoretical understanding of how the nuts and the fruits and flakes land in the bowl. Well, the friends of mine in California say they all end up there, the nuts and the fruits and the flakes. But what have your last thought of the morning?
Oh, my last thought comes from the Sunday Telegraph, and I suppose has to do with health in a different form. I didn't know that large parts of Leamington Spa had become an alcohol-free zone. Penalty £500, it says. It's as dry as a bone on the streets of Leamington Spa. The town has declared itself an alcohol-free zone, effectively banishing the lager can carrying, I can hardly say it, yobs and bottle-wielding winos, and crime is down by 40%. How's that?
Well, on that upbeat note, we say thank you to you both. That was a terrific review. Thank you very much indeed, Barbara.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. A joy, and we'll remember the prediction. Now, what sort of weather can we expect today? With us in the weather studio is the woman who knows all, Suzanne Charlton.
Thanks, David. Cold is how it's going to feel today, just about right across the country. Now, these are the afternoon temperatures that we're expecting, up to 7 or 8 Celsius in the southwest, but that's the exception. Most of us struggling only to 2 to 4 degrees, and with a cold, cutting easterly wind. Still very strong in the northeast of Scotland and strengthening up across the southwest and around the Western Channel. And when we add the temperatures and that wind together, it's going to feel bitterly cold. It will feel as if it's several degrees below freezing. That's the wind chill. We've got a little bit of sleet and snow around too, just a little, gradually edging its way northwards out to the Midlands and up through towards the Peak District here and in Snowdonia, mainly a little bit icy on some roads for the next few hours. All in all, it's to the west we look for any brightness, northwest Scotland, maybe parts of southwest England. The eastern areas are going to remain dull and cloudy with 1 or 2 light flurries of snow. And that really goes for tonight as well, when there will be some frost around away from some of the coastal districts. Monday, much the same too, still that cold, cutting wind, but later on in the day we'll start to see some rain moving up from the southwest, and ahead of that, maybe 1 or 2 little bits and pieces of snow. That's how it looks. Basically, it's going to be a cold, windy day and a cold, windy week. That's how it looks, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Suzanne, and now it's our pleasure to welcome the man self-described as the cayenne pepper in one paper today, in the equation with Labour. And as the devil, I suppose you could argue, the headline in the Mail on Sunday. If Blair is dealing with the devil, I mean, then you can take your choice whether you feel like the devil this morning or the cayenne pepper this morning. It's good to have you with us, Paddy.
Nice to be with you, David.
Just starting off on where all these things stand, because we've had a lot of extravagant descriptions and so on, but in terms of the relationship between Labour and Lib Dems, on the subject that Tony Blair raised at the conference, you have a pledge at the moment from Labour that they will conduct a referendum on PR.
I don't have a pledge from Labour. Labour have made that commitment, and they made it some time ago. You see, David, where I think we are now is that I actually think the public is fed up with opposition parties that simply attack the government. Yes, but I'm trying to. I think they're fed up with the parties that simply attack the government. I think they want parties to lay out where they stand. Now, we've done that, and we intend to go on doing that. We'll do it with increasing clarity. I'll do it tomorrow. We'll say where we stand. Now, I'd like to know where Labour stands. In many ways, that's a challenge to them. And insofar as Labour has begun to lay out its propositions for the country, of which a referendum on PR is one, that's a good thing. But they're ill-formed and a long, long way to go yet.
But on that, what are the things you need? First of all, they've only at the moment said it will take place, a referendum, in the course of the next Parliament. You need it to be at the beginning, so that there's time, you want it implemented by the following election,
David,
yes?
We are not talking to Labour. We're talking to the people of Britain.
Well,
and it is what this country needs that matters.
Yeah,
now,
but
what this country needs is, for instance, a commitment to invest in education.
Yeah, but
it
what
needs a
on
commitment.
This point we're talking about.
Well, let me see if I can answer you. It needs a commitment to give Britain a modern constitution, and quickly. And part of that modern constitution, necessarily, is a modern voting system. So what we're talking about is not the who or the how, but the what. And what we're talking about is not a dialogue with Labour, it's a dialogue with the people of this country. We are prepared to stake out very, very clearly what needs to be done to put right the wreckage of Britain left by this government. Now that's a comprehensive programme. It doesn't depend on a little bit here, a little bit there. The powerful thought that I have at the moment is this. Given the wreckage of the left behind by the Conservative Party, I believe that the things that need to be done to give Britain a modern constitution, to give it a chance in the next century, to give this country, to put this country right, probably can't be done in a single parliament, probably can't be done by a single party, and certainly can't be done unless we are prepared to construct a new contract between politicians and people. And that's the centre of the message. So I'm not speaking to Labour, I'm speaking to the people of this country. There's our challenge. That's where we stand. It's an inherent challenge to Labour. Can you be as clear? Can you be as tough? Are you prepared to cost your policies in the way that we are? And where do you stand?
Right. But I mean, therefore, do you want PR to actually not only be polled, but introduced by that very important second election that you're talking about?
I want a modern constitution, of which a fair voting system is a part, to be in place, just as much as I want Britain to make a commitment to investing in education. This is a programme that hangs together as a whole. It's a programme which is about the future of this country as you count to the next millennium. You can't pick a single bit out. I know you'd like to, but you can't do that.
No, but it's a very, very tangible point. You're always saying...
Well, let me see if I can answer you directly.
Specific. The two things are, would you like to see an early referendum in the first term of a Labour government so that it can be implemented to the next election? I think your point about it will need 2 terms is your way of probably saying yes to that. And the second thing is, would you expect, in the event of a referendum, Tony Blair, as the Prime Minister, to endorse the referendum in the sense that he would argue and campaign for a yes vote? Would you expect that from a Prime Minister, or could he say, I don't like it, but I'm lumbered with having a referendum, do what you like?
Well, I can't see how anybody can offer a referendum and say, please make up your mind because I can't make up mine. I mean, having a referendum is not the same as, you can't say I have a referendum rather than have an opinion. Of course, we want to see the things that need to be done in Britain, in the next government, done early. We want to see a commitment to invest in education. We want to see a commitment to a clear policy on Europe. We want to see a commitment to change our attitude to the environment so that we can begin to save the environment in this country. We want to see a commitment, for instance, to giving every child in Britain access to preschool education for 2 years, and we want to see a commitment, which we are determined to act as the guarantee for, to a reformed and modernised constitution. Let me put it to you this way. I don't believe that the things that need to be done in this country can be done unless you have a modern constitution. That is the enabling measure that makes the other things possible. But what we are doing at the moment is we're not talking to Labour, we're staking out our position for the people of Britain so that they know clearly where we stand. And insofar as there's a message for Labour, the message is, we are prepared to be clear about this. Are you?
And let me be clear about this. You are therefore saying that, in what you just said, that Tony Blair could not really call a referendum where he said, make up my mind for me. He would have to be behind the proposition of the referendum, or it would be absurd.
It would be pretty bizarre to say, please, people of Britain, will you make up my mind for me, because I can't make up my mind myself. But that's a question he has to address. Not a question of me telling him what to say. He's got to decide what he's going to do himself. My concern at the moment is to speak directly and in a more honest fashion, and perhaps in a clearer language than has ever been done before, not to Tony Blair or Labour, but to the people of this country. I am determined that the Liberal Democrats, at this moment, respond to what I think is the primary challenge. And the primary challenge is not how do we defeat the Conservatives. They're defeating themselves. The primary challenge is, can we say what we want for this country? I will do that. I'll say something else, which is this, that if and when Labour make up its mind about what it wants, if there are areas where they agree with us then of course we work together. That's the new kind of politics I want to introduce.
So that new working together, sure. Your phrase there, I mean, implies then, to just simply clarify things, I mean, there will be no pre-election pact between Labour and the Liberal Democrats.
No.
There could be a formal coalition government after the next election?
Yes, of course. I mean, if the mathematics said that, if the policies were agreed between them, if they were putting into practice the things that we believe in, that's a possibility. But it's also a possibility that we vote them down if that is not what we believe needs to be done in this country. And I'll give you a third possibility, and in many ways you might argue the most likely one. If the Conservatives now go into terminal collapse, just remember in the last nationwide elections in May this year, we were the second party and the Tories were third. Perfectly possible the Liberal Democrats become the opposition, Her Majesty's opposition to Labour. And I don't predict that as an outcome, of course I don't.
But it's
impossible. Nothing is impossible, David. And that's why I think at this moment, although I understand your enthusiasm for these matters to discuss the how and the who, the important thing now is to stake out the what. Liberal Democrats have done that, and I will do it even more clearly in a speech I'm making tomorrow. What exactly we stand for. There's our stall. That's what we stand for. Costed, clear, committed. Challenge to Labour. Can you be as clear and costed? If you can, and if you agree with us in the areas that we've staked out, of course we'll work with you. That's what the new politics should be about. I think the politicians, I think the people in this country are fed up to the back teeth with politicians who spend their entire time slagging each other off and aren't prepared to work where they agree and where it's in the country's interest.
And since you don't rule out a coalition after the next election, obviously you don't rule out seats in the cabinet for people not a million miles away from this sofa.
Nothing is ruled out, to coin the famous phrase, and nothing is ruled in. At this moment, the important thing is to say what you want for our country, not whose bum sits on the leather seat of a government Daimler. That is the important point, and we will make sure that that is the key point right the way through this. I am not interested in power, whether on the opposition benches or in government, simply for the position of power. I'm in politics to do things for the things that I believe in. And that's why I think the first stage of this is to say, here we stand. Like Martin Luther, here we stand. Yes, I want the Liberal Democrats to be, use the phrase, the cayenne pepper, in what is otherwise looks to me to be a pretty boring meal presented before the British people. But above all, at this moment, the challenge for opposition parties is to say, where do you stand? And that's what we're going to be very clear about.
Well, promise you won't be the garlic, because I can't stand garlic. Tom McNally said, I do not rule out some kind of mutual endorsement, i.e. all the things we've been talking about, that going into the election, you work out some form of mutual endorsement of each other. Is that possible?
Look, I can't predict what's going to come down the track, David, and neither can you. And frankly, it is a mug's game to try. We live in the most volatile period of politics I think we've ever seen. I can't tell you what's going to happen around the corner. I can't tell you what the Grim Reaper will do to the Tory mathematics. I can't tell you what Mr. David Trimble will do next week. I can't tell you whether Labour will go up or down. Remember that President Bush was 18 points ahead of Mr. Clinton. What was it? 8 months before the election, and lost. And 2 years later, there was the Gingrichian Republican landslide. We live in volatile times. The important thing is not to speculate about this framework or that framework. The important thing is to say, where do you stand? We're clear on Europe, on the environment, on education, on the kind of economy, on our commitment to giving Britain a modern constitution. These are the things that matter. Those are the things that people will vote for.
At the same time as the what are the policies? I mean, at the same time, the how is quite important. I mean, because do these policies matter? How are they going to be implemented? Right. The how is also very important.
The how is important, and we staked out our position last year, and that's the framework. But you're absolutely right. The party will have to be, all parties will have to be clearer. As that moment of decision comes, we'll have to stake out exactly who and perhaps even how we will work with others on the areas when they've staked out where they stand. And that will come. It'll have to come. I'm determined that we approach the British electorate with an honesty and a clarity we haven't done before. But it would be madness at the moment, and confusing, to indulge in speculation about the long-term future, when what people want to know is not how and who, for what you stand for.
But how would you characterise your relationship, though, with Tony Blair? I mean,
good.
You have one-on-one conversations and phone calls?
I have one-on-one conversations with John Major. We meet in the margins of great events like Mitterrand's funeral and discuss things. Of course we do. You saw that picture at the VJ Day Parade when we were discussing the Prime Minister's goldfish.
Absolutely.
To and fro, the conversation of politics.
A memorable study.
But let me make it clear. Let me make one thing clear. I think the Tory party is now in terminal decay and disarray. Emma Nicholson's defection was, in my view, an event which spoke to tens of thousands across the country. I had people come up to me and say, you know, when I heard her describe how she couldn't be in the Tory party any longer, I suddenly realised why I couldn't be either. And I will be making this week a very direct appeal to those people. There is a home for us, as Emma Nicholson has found. There is a home for you in the Liberal Democrats. Michael Portillo said, there is no place in the Conservative Party for those who want to see a continuation of the process of European integration. There's a very welcome place in the Liberal Democrats for them.
For Federalist Europe and so on, he said also, didn't he? Yes. But you would say proudly, I am a federalist, wouldn't you?
Well, because I understand what the word federalist means, and I don't try and distort it into meaning something different. It actually means a decentralized democratic Europe, which is what I believe in. But look, David, this is a very, very important historic moment for Europe. This great thing, European integration, originally proposed in order to banish war from our continent. We are now moving into one of the most unstable, potentially dangerous decades of even this most dangerous of centuries. If at this moment the process of European integration is, because of lack of leadership from John Major and others, allowed to begin to unravel, we could lose the whole of Europe at just the moment when we will need it most. I want the people of this country to know that the Liberal Democrats are a rock upon which you can depend to make sure that this country plays a constructive part in that process of integration, that it doesn't go into reverse. Of course we want to see Europe reformed. Of course we want to see its institutions made more democratic. Of course we want to see power decentralized. But that Europe should continue down this path, which has preserved our peace at this moment, is vital. And the other parties may equivocate, they can shift all over the place. We will not.
You mentioned Emma Nicholson there. Just for clarity's sake, you've been listening to the voters as you said you would. Are you now in favour of the fact that she should resign and stand again?
No, because her constituents aren't, quite clearly. There's going to be no call from within her constituency. If there had been, she quite rightly said she would have stood in a by-election. She made that proposition at the start. I agreed with her, but there's been no such call.
There's no such call, no such evidence?
Absolutely not. And indeed, the Conservative Party may call for an election, but they don't want one down there. They know perfectly well what the outcome would be. No, Emma Nicholson has taken the right step. She's listened to her electorate, and I'm convinced she's right in judging that there isn't a call in her electorate for a by-election.
And in terms of the cloak and dagger excitement, just like the old days in the Special Boat Squadron, cloak and dagger operation, secret meetings in Exeter and so on, and luring her within your fold. I mean, have either you or your colleagues had any other exploratory conversations with other Tories?
Well, you wouldn't expect me to tell you if we had. But
I'm not saying who. I'm just saying how many.
You wouldn't expect me to tell you if you had.
I would. I'm not.
I know, David, but that's what makes you so endearing and charming. I can tell you this, that the important thing is, I think the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even more people across this country for whom Emma Nicholson has spoken and acted, Tory voters, Tory supporters, good Tories who understand that the battle for one nation Toryism, the battle for a Tory party that takes a constructive line on Europe, has been lost. They are looking for a home, a non-socialist alternative to the Conservatives in this country, committed to the things like education they're committed to, determined to make sure that we build a self-reliant, responsible society. Many of those are finding a home in the Liberal Democrats, and I hope many more will.
And in terms of education, which you mentioned, is perhaps your great lead item in many ways, but there's a lot in the papers today about Harriet Harman's decision for a grammar school for her child and so on and so forth. Does that come over to you as perfectly legitimate and private, or does it reflect something?
It's the most painful decision a parent has to make about their children, and for every parent they have a right to make sure that that decision comes first. But a politician also has to ensure that what they do and what they say matches up. It's a very difficult thing sometimes. To act perfectly consistently is always very tough. I must say, I do have difficulties about that, but I'm not in the business of condemning out of hand Harriet Harman and others. And I leave that to the Conservative Party. They've got overhyped at the moment. I think it is incumbent on all of us to do the things that we say other people should do in this country, and I therefore find some difficulty with the decision Harriet Harman's taken. But I understand, it's a very difficult personal decision.
And yes, the most personal of all in terms of that. There were rumours in the papers last week or two, there were lots of rumours in the papers, but that Charles Kennedy might end up running for Labour in the next election. Is that possible?
Well, Charles Kennedy has said what I think most people understand, that that's balderdash.
Pardon?
Charles Kennedy has said that that's balderdash, and I think that's right.
Just balderdash, simple balderdash. And tell me, if you had to think of one critical phrase, Paddy, that given everything that Tony Blair has done in terms of modernising the Labour Party and on things like the market and Europe and welfare, he's met a great many of your, what were they, the charred principles? Anyway, C-H-A-R-D, folks, not C-H-A-R-R-E-D. If the Liberal Democratic Party did not exist, why would we have to invent it?
Because you get no other party which was committed to Britain's future in Europe. Labour isn't. I mean, Labour's gone some way to clarify their views, but you still see these internal rows in Labour. They're as divided on Europe as indeed the Tories are, and you've seen today about how the highest echelons of Labour, there is now some squabbling going on. Labour is not committed and will not take the tough decisions about investing in education. You know, they say they want, for instance, every child to have 2 years of preschool education, so do I. But it doesn't mean anything unless you say how you'll pay for it. Only the Liberal Democrats will do that. Labour won't even mention the environment, and yet it's central to our beliefs and the way that we think Britain has to be run in the future. And Labour's commitment to a modern constitution for Britain is recent and hazy at best. Ours is clear and absolutely committed. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you want a guarantee for these things, a free economy, a clear position in Europe, a modern constitution in Britain, the only guarantee for that comes in Liberal Democrat seats and Liberal Democrat votes.
Paddy, thank you very much for being with us. It's always a delight to have you with us. Thank you very much. Slightly delayed. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to Paddy Ashdown. And now we turn from British politics to the world stage. The Gulf War began 5 years ago this week. And this morning we bring you not one, but two exclusive conversations on the Gulf War with President Bush. In his first extended television interview since leaving the White House, he talked frankly and openly about the many questions and issues that have emerged since the Allies drove Saddam's forces back into Iraq. But we precede that interview with some excerpts from a previously secret conversation that took place on March the 9th, 1991, at Camp David, scene of many of the decisions we were about to discuss. The purpose of the session was to record for history the President's reflections while the events, and equally important, the emotions, were still fresh in his mind, as America rejoiced that the war had been brought to a successful conclusion just 10 days earlier. Joining the President for parts of the session were some of his closest advisors, and his closest advisor of all, his wife Barbara. At one stage, he talked about John Major's first visit to Camp David in December of 1990, following the resignation of Margaret Thatcher at the end of November.
While you were in the Gulf, of course, there'd been a change of leadership in the UK. Margaret Thatcher decided that she couldn't prevail in the internal poll of the Conservative Party, and John Major became Prime Minister. Now, John Major came here to this very room just before Christmas, and on the way here, you had important discussions with him.
We rode up in the car, and we started talking about timing as to when we might have to use force. And I told him, you know, we had some intervening things that had to happen, but I told him that it was my intention, right after the deadline expired, to do what we had to do, to use force. I said, how about 0400 in the morning on the 16th? How does that grab you? Kind of looked a little bit. He was coming around the corner down here. Whoops. But he never flinched, and I don't know whether he said, well, that's fine, let's discuss it or something. And then I called him later on, well, after this, and said we're going to have to slip this time by 24 hours. Some of our own people thought I was being a little reckless in you know, hitting it that quick. But as it worked out, the delay didn't indicate wobbliness. It was only 24 hours, and it gave people time to sort things out.
Well, wobbles by definition are at least a week in length.
Yeah, it's got to be to have a real wobble.
According to the Oxford Dictionary.
But I will say this for Major, just come in, just coming to discuss this with his new partner, although I'd met him a time or two, and I could see, I mean, that might not have been the easiest pill he had to digest, but I didn't take it as a pill. He said, hey, we're together. And I thought it was magnificent, and Brent may have had a chance to talk to Charles about it. Maybe you could editorialize at that point, but I think they accepted this and were totally on board.
So that really John Major was the first person outside your inner circle to know that?
To know that time. Then we communicated with the French fairly soon, and then we kept it very close hold. Those were the need to know, and then Norm Schwarzkopf in the field got into discussions with the commanders out there, the Saudis and others, forces.
Well, it's quite important he know too, I suppose.
Here, but let me stop you, because here's just a little side tidbit for history on John Major. 22nd, sitting at Camp David, good visit with Prime Minister Major, a delightful guy, and Barbara likes Norma. He's young, and I find myself thinking, God, everybody's young. I never thought I'd reach this stage. He's young and able, articulate, and I'm going to enjoy working with him.
Young John Major visiting Camp David, talking about, in fact, John Major's visit, which was just a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks after he took over as Prime Minister. Towards the end of our session at Camp David, we gained a unique insight into the pressures in times of war on the Commander-in-Chief.
You've had incredible pressure over the past 7 months, ending in joy. You've had the emotional pressures of finding out what was going on in Kuwait, the responsibility of ordering our boys into a battle from which they might not return, and so on. What was the most emotional moment of this whole last 7 months for you?
Oh, Lord, there were several, but just any thought of the loss of a life. The sign that says, bring my husband home safe. I said when I came into this job, I would never plead for sympathy from people about this being the loneliest and toughest, and this wasn't a lonely period. But there was a certain burden, and it related to the responsibility for the lives of others.
And that was the...
That was the toughest, yeah, because you just don't need that.
When you see 17 and 18-year-olds...
Oh, God. But that goes with the territory. I mean, that you just have to accept that. But I must say...
In moments like that, do you pray more than ever before in your life? It's a hell of a responsibility that you probably wouldn't wish on anyone else. But you handled it.
That was the tough part.
Let me just conclude by this quote. You said this to the Congress: we're coming home now, proud, confident, heads high. There is much that we must do at home and abroad, and we will do it. We are Americans. You're the only superpower there is left.
That's right.
What do you do next?
Well, you conduct yourself without arrogance. You lead. You are considerate to the concerns of other countries, large and small. But you stand for something once again. And that gives us a new credibility, and it gives us a new force with which to help solve heretofore intractable problems. The obvious one is the problems of the West Bank, Palestine. But I think this experience, this very emotional experience for America, will last us as a people for a long time. It'll give us, we have a sense of pride out across this country now.
Sense of pride 10 days after the war. President George Bush, Camp David, March the 9th, 1991. Almost 5 years later, President Bush sat down with us again, this time in his office in Houston. In the intervening 5 years, many new questions have emerged about the timing of the end of the war, about the negotiations at Safwan, when the Iraqis formally surrendered to the Allies, about Saddam's nuclear potential, and about the question of the possible use of chemical weapons by Saddam during the war. Not to mention the question of how President Bush feels about Saddam 5 years later. We began by discussing the build-up to war in general and the role of the head of the Joint Chiefs, General Colin Powell, in particular. Colin Powell has said since that in many ways he was a reluctant warrior. I mean, he was a tremendously effective warrior when war came, obviously, but he was a reluctant warrior. You had to lead him. You really had to do some leading in the early stages. Well, when you decided this will not stand, that sort of took them by surprise.
Well, it may have taken them by surprise, but to the degree Colin is alleged to have dragged his feet, I never saw it. I never sensed it. We would, as a president should do, task the military way back in August to come up with a plan, and then later on task them to supplement that plan. And I never felt for 1 minute that Colin Powell was dragging his feet. I know he was reluctant to commit force in principle. He had a formula that I adopted as mine. Define the mission. How are you going to accomplish the mission? And when are your kids coming home? Those are three major points in what I think was Powell's philosophy, and I know it's mine. But Sir David, I never felt that that Powell or Schwarzkopf or any of these people were just wantonly dragging their feet because they did not want to commit their forces.
One of the most complex things throughout the whole period of the air war and later the ground war, but particularly the air war, was obviously relations with Israel. I mean, that must have been, in all the coalition building, keeping them on side and not part of the coalition, that must have been one of the most complex things you had to do.
Absolutely. Israel has an understandable policy. Somebody hits us, we're going to hit them. So when the Scud missiles landed in Israel, the Israeli leaders were anxious to retaliate, and I can understand that. But I also understood that if they retaliated, we would have an instant shattering of this diverse coalition. And they knew that too. And so we had to lean on them very hard to get them to lay aside that premise that if somebody hits them, they're going to hit them back.
What would have been the game plan if they had got involved militarily?
Well, I think we would have had to go forward. We would have had to escalate the diplomatic effort to make sure to our coalition partners that this was simply a restatement of Israel's position. We're going to hit you if you hit us. But it would have been extraordinarily difficult. They came to me and wanted to retaliate by air, meaning that they wanted to fly across, I think it was Saudi Arabia and Jordan, to do this. Well, we knew what kind of reaction that would bring in the Arab world if we had given them permission to do that. So we denied them the codes. And we said, we're not going to give you the codes, and thus your aircraft are going to be flying and exposed to the threat of friendly fire. And they did not like that. And I know it was in the best interest of Israel's security, though, and I know it was the best interest of coalition solidarity.
Dan Quayle in his book said, I believe the executive order prohibiting assassination of foreign leaders should be rescinded so that the president would have one more option in extraordinary circumstances. Do you agree with that?
No, I didn't see that he said that, but having been the director of Central Intelligence for one fascinating year, I don't believe that order should be rescinded. Now, if you want to put it into the context of the war, Saddam Hussein was the commander-in-chief of the Iraqi forces, And if his life had been snuffed out in a bombing attack or something, too bad. That's one of the prices of war. But I don't believe that we should clandestinely target foreign leaders for assassination.
Are there any circumstances in which you actually had a nuclear option, or do you think it would be very difficult for any president to exercise?
I think it would be extraordinarily difficult. I suppose you could conjure up some horrible scenario that would call for the use of battlefield tactical nuclear weapons or something, but it was not something that we really contemplated at all. What we did want to do, though, is leave doubt. We're not going to say what we're going to do or what we're not going to do. And we did worry, David, about the chemical weapon potential. We weren't sure where he was in terms of nuclear weapons. Turns out he's further along than we thought at the time on his own nuclear weapons. And, you know, if you want to paint a scenario, if he used a nuclear weapon, what would we do? Then all bets are off. We would do whatever we had to respond in kind. But it never came up in the sense of let's talk about a real nuclear option, at least in the White House.
Do you think that Saddam Hussein had more or less chemical, biological, and nuclear capacity than we thought at the time?
I think he proved to have more. I think recent history shows that he was further advanced in the nuclear field than we thought he was. I think we accurately assessed where he stood in terms of chemical, and I just not knowledgeable on whether we were right on target or not on the biological. We knew that he'd use chemical weapons. One of my big worries as commander-in-chief, which was shared by our military, was the fact that he might use chemical weapons. Their military would tell you today there's no evidence that he did use chemical weapons, and I've been reassured of that very recently.
Is it possible at all that he did, in one or two isolated cases, use either chemical or biological weapons?
Well, there's a body of thought that says so, but I'm inclined to believe the military is telling the truth, our military, and I know at the time there was no evidence, direct or indirect, of his use of chemical weapons. We lived in fear of it. We equipped our people with the latest gear to be sure they could fend off such an attack. But now you have sickness of some people that served honorably in Desert Storm. Some of their lawyers are alleging that it was because of the use by Iraq of chemical weapons. But our military, who have no reason to lie, feel that that's not the case. Obviously, my heart goes out to the victims, whoever it is, this syndrome of health syndrome. But I was never told, and nor do I believe, that when we were conducting that war, that he used chemical weapons.
And you were there in the White House, obviously, for a long time after that, and it never
came to me.
When the end of the war came, which is endlessly debated, you said one of the main things was the turkey shoot argument. These pictures were going around the world of effectively defenseless Iraqis being shot and so on and killed, and that was one of the key motivations in your decision. What was the feedback from the rest of the coalition at that point?
Well, in the first place, we defined the mission, and the mission was to end the aggression. It wasn't to further decimate the Republican Guard. It wasn't to increase the body count by stacking up another 50,000 Iraqi dead. It was not to go into find Saddam Hussein. That's what the mission was not. The mission was to end the aggression. Our commanders, our defense people, Dick Cheney and Colin Powell, came to see me one day and said it is time to end the war. And I said, do our commanders agree? Does Schwarzkopf and the men in the field agree? And they said yes. They got Schwarzkopf on the phone from the Oval Office, and he confirmed to me that the time had come to end the war. I've always had this feeling that kind of decision should be defined by the military. Now, on the turkey shoot aspect, the argument by some of whom opposed me incidentally, that we should have continued because we could have further punished the Iraq by just staying alive, keeping the war going for 24 hours. I don't remember even thinking of it at the time. Military said the war is over, we've accomplished our objectives. Our political people said the war, if they feel that way, the battle is over on the ground, we've done our thing. But there's a moral imperative here, and I don't think the United States, nor the United Kingdom, nor France, measure the extent of their victory by an increased body count. We could have massacred these people fleeing up the highway of death in those broken down, stolen vehicles. We could have killed another couple of hundred tanks and thus further diminished the capability of the Republican Guard to project their horror. But I don't think, war is immoral, but I don't think you measure the totality of its success by whether you can shoot down kill another 50,000 fleeing soldiers, murderous though they had been in Kuwait.
And the people say now as much as 50% of the Republican Guards escaped or had escaped or escaped across the Euphrates. If you'd known the figure was that high, would you still have done what you did?
Yes, because I told you what I guide myself on. The Allies, incidentally, agreed with the decision. There was no dissent from any single individual that I talked to or that any of our people talked to. We were involved in a coalition, and so it wasn't, I didn't want to ram something down their throat. There was no objection whatsoever, and I think in retrospect they're correct. And I think Colin Powell and others that understand the forces involved feel that Saddam's ability to project invasion of another country have been so severely limited, even with the formula that we ended with, that we don't have to worry about that.
And in terms of going on to Baghdad, you've made the arguments at the time about the fact that we might have been stuck there for years and so on, and that the coalition would certainly have splintered over the move of going to Baghdad. But do you think that we could have demanded the handing over of Saddam, done something to him? Could we have demanded he turn up at Safwan and kneel before General Schwarzkopf or whatever? I mean, could we have done...
I think maybe in retrospect we could have done more. Whether we could have had as a sine qua non Saddam showing up in that tent and handing over his sword or having a ceremony which would visibly increase his personal humiliation, I don't know. The alternative was, well, suppose we demand he come and he says, I'm not going to show up. Then what do? Say, we're going to come get you? And then if he says, well, that's what it's going to take, then we are an occupying force in an Arab land. The coalition shatters. Mubarak couldn't have stayed with us. Syrians have gone over the hill. I'm not sure how maybe the Saudis and the Kuwaitis would have cheered us on. I'm not sure how the Europeans would have felt if we'd have gone beyond the UN mandate. And there would we be, downtown Baghdad, America occupying an Arab land, searching for this brutal dictator who had the best security in the world, involved in an urban guerrilla war. That is not a formula that I wanted to contemplate, and I think history will say we did the right thing. Now, if you rephrase it and say, could we have done things differently in Safran, as you said, I think maybe in retrospect we could have. It might not have been demanding that Saddam Hussein appear, but the Saudi general in charge of Saudi forces felt that we needed higher level representation, maybe just one step below Saddam, to further demonstrate to the world that they were surrendering, they were throwing in the towel. We might have handled the flying of helicopters differently, but so I think there's room for some ex post facto criticism here, but I don't think demanding Saddam come would have been the right thing to do.
No, but we could have been tougher at Safwan on the helicopter, civilian and military.
And maybe other things, maybe other formulations, but not continuing the war. I know there's a lot of revisionists and smart Alecs sitting out there that didn't have to make the decision about exposing somebody's kid to another day of danger, but I'm not there. My view of America's was when the Iraqis came out of that foxhole. We saw it on CNN and every place, and they thought they were going to be killed, and the Americans said, we're American soldiers, we're not going to hurt you. That's a better view than going and killing another 50,000 fleeing soldiers.
And of course, at the time, you mentioned hindsight earlier. I mean, at the time of our March the 9th conversation, certainly leading up to the 100-hour war, we all, the world, assumed, in fact, that Saddam could not survive a humiliating defeat. I mean, we assumed that his ousting would come anyway, didn't we?
You mean his ousting out of office?
Yeah.
Everybody felt that Saddam Hussein could not stay in office, certainly stay in office as long as he stayed in office. And I miscalculated. I thought he'd be gone, but I wasn't alone. The people in the Arab world felt, you know, with unanimity that he would be out of there. I think all observers felt that. He will be. At some point he will be. But not through, you know, I mean, I think he's going to be thrown out eventually.
Hopefully not through old age. Before old age.
He's a little younger than I am, so, but I've been wrong on the fact that he would be in power this long. And so were a lot of other people wrong on that. And I'm damned unhappy about it, too, because he's brutalizing his own people to this day.
In a way, he brutalized his own people almost more quickly and more severely than even his enemies, all of us, might have thought, really. I mean, he moved against the Shiites in the south and the Kurds in the north. I mean, he moved more quickly and more severely to re-stamp his ailing authority, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He took us by surprise, really.
Well, I think he took us by surprise. I very much am offended by the idea that I encouraged the Shiites to rise up and then failed to support them. That is not what I stated. What I stated is that once Saddam Hussein were out of there, we would be ready to have better relations with Iraq immediately. And our argument wasn't with the people of Iraq or with the military Iraq. It was with Saddam Hussein himself.
In that period after the war, people were talking about, on the one hand, about should we have given greater support to the Kurds and the Shiites. And others were arguing that would offend Turkey and Syria with the Kurds, and people who are frightened of Iran would be worried about the Shiites in the south and so on. And we must avoid at all costs the Lebanization of Iraq. Was that basically what we all felt?
I think we had a rather unanimous feeling that we did not want to see a partitioned Iraq, that we saw nothing to be gained by disturbing the balance in that part of the world by having Iraq chopped up into, say, 3 pieces, or having them left so they would be totally victimized by an aggressive Iran. We had a big global view of all of that, and the view was that Iraq ought not to be partitioned, and that did not mean condoning the brutality to the Shiites in the south or brutality to the Kurds in the north. But I think there was this view that a fractured Iraq, long run, would be detrimental to the peace in the whole Gulf area.
In addition to being irredeemably bad, in retrospect, do you think he is partially mad?
Wacko? I don't think so. From what I've, you know, the psychological profiles. But he's brutal. I mean, maybe you have to be mad to personally kill people. Maybe you have to be mad to make such crazy decisions that you have nobody in your corner. So I don't know, but I guess I'd have to stop short of saying that he's certifiably nuts.
You talked, when we talked just after the war, about the fact that you would have liked
a clean ending, as you put it. Now, by that, what did you mean?
I meant a battleship Missouri surrender, where you Missouri pulled into Tokyo Harbor, and imperialism ended right there with the laying of a sword on a desk, and the whole world saw it. I think the ending, in my view, was clean in terms of accomplishing our mission, end the aggression. But the ending wasn't quite as clean as it might have been if Saddam Hussein had come to the tent, laid it down his thing, and maybe left office. I mean, that would have been the cleanest possible ending, because then everybody could have started over with Iraq. There wouldn't have been an instantly, human rights-led democracy, and tried to bring them into the family of nations. So that would have been those scenarios would have been much cleaner. But the message, what the troops did and how the coalition formed and fought is a pretty clear message today, in my view.
Are there any other misconceptions or myths that have grown up in the 5 years since the Gulf War that when you see them you...
Bristle?
Bristle?
Well, I think there's, I can't really think specifically, but there are probably some. There's some revisionists out there that think it might not have been worth doing this, that the United States shouldn't use force at all. There's some genuine pacifists who felt it was wrong to use force, even though they couldn't explain away the brutality, the forceful brutality to the people of Kuwait, the raping of the 13-year-old girls and the killing of families in Kuwait City. That was force, but they still felt that the United States should not use its force to counter that. I mean, I'm presiding bishop of my church. I'm an Episcopalian. Some might say Anglican.
Yeah.
And he felt that way. He told me so. He came to the Oval Office and told me, you must not use force. And I asked him to read the Amnesty International report. And I said, please, sir, tell me after you read this whether it would be right to use force when you see the rape of these 13-year-old Kuwaiti girls whose lives are ruined forever. And he wrote me back and he said, I read the report and I wept, but I still don't think you ought to use force. It was pretty profound from the leader of my church, because I was contemplating having to send young men and women into battle.
On January the 29th, 1991, you spoke about the big idea. You said, a new world order where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace, security, freedom, and the rule of law. That was an ultimate goal you were talking about there, of course, but in your statement to the shareholders after 5 years, what would you say about the progress?
Well, I think it has a long way to go before it's perfected, but I look at it as a road that's going to lead to far more freedoms, and yet there's some significant bumps in that road, some potholes out there that need to be filled up. But are we better off today than when we had superpower confrontation and monolithic communism, everybody worrying about its aggressive intent? Absolutely. And are there more freedoms in the world today? Certainly. Is there more democracy? Absolutely. But I certainly think that there are plenty of problems before we get to this euphoric state of total democracy, total freedom, total respect for human rights.
And the danger is obviously lies in nuclear proliferation, really, that Saddam, or if there are other Saddams around the world, could hold the world to ransom if they really had a readiness to use a proliferated nuclear weapon.
The enemy is no longer a superpower. The enemy is unpredictability, it's instability, it's international terror, to a degree it's international narcotics trade, and it is certainly nuclear proliferation. These are the enemies, or this is one enemy. And we've got to stay involved and to lead and to battle against these things as the United States of America. We have an obligation to do that. and we must not selfishly turn inward.
Mr. President, thank you so much.
All right.
President George Bush in Houston. And now an update on the news headlines from Jenny Bond.
Thanks, David. Time just for the main stories this morning. The PLO leader Yasser Arafat has won an overwhelming victory in the first Palestinian general election. With a few votes still left to be counted, the Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres has called the outcome the crowning achievement of the peace process. The turnout for the